Hi, hi. Have you ever wondered about reports and narratives and you want to know, okay, are there different types? Does it really matter if you know all the different types? And how does that actually help you with writing a report effectively? So, in today's session of Journey to SEA 2024, we'll be doing exactly that, discussing all of those details. So, stay tuned. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Miss Shelley-Ann. I'm a creative writing specialist, and this series that you're looking at is called Journey to SEA 2024. And during this series and all the episodes that you'll be looking at, hopefully you'll join me for all of them. We'll be looking at narrative writing and creative writing, and I'll be sharing with you tips and strategies for how you can work with your child or your students to help them write the best report possible or the best narrative possible. And both, because, as it is right now, we're preparing for both. We're no longer being told which one is coming. So students have to really be prepared for both narratives and reports. And if you're new to the series, this is actually episode 3. So you may want to go back and look at episode 1 and 2, which dealt with getting started, downloading the schedule if you haven't already done that. We also looked at what is a report and what is a narrative, and these are really important foundation concepts as we move ahead. So you can find those in SEA Peacefield Approach. That is a Facebook group. If you're not already a member, please join. You can also find the videos on YouTube with Coach Limited. Click on the lives and you'd see all the videos there. And now I'm so happy to report that you can also find the videos on my website, woodcoach.com. So all the links are in the comments in the notes of this video, so you can check them out and you can go back to looking at the previous episodes if you've missed any. But today's session, and thank you for those of you who are joining live, I always appreciate the fact that there is someone there while I'm speaking because, I'm kind of here alone. But I really do appreciate you, taking the time. And for those who are looking at the replay, thank you so much. And I welcome comments and questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. Just search my name, Shelley-Ann Edwards-Barran. You can also look for Wood Coach Youth. You can message me there as well. And if you want to send me a WhatsApp, my number is 868-717-4993. All right, so now that all of that is out of the way, let's get into the discussion for today. Now, as always, I'm looking at both reports and narratives, and I generally like to start with the report writing first because I think that is a lot more, straightforward and objective, and then we can get into the discussion where the narrative writing is concerned. So today we're talking types of reports. All right, since we're starting with report writing. And I'm going to be dealing with 5 of them. There is a sixth one that I do teach in my classes when I engage with students. And we will be discussing it from time to time as we go through the step by step approach for the series that we're dealing with. But I'm not really going to be getting into it today as a type, but I will mention it because it's something that you can look out for. But I feel like um, the 5 that I will be discussing today are the main 5. But like I said, I will mention that fifth one. So let's get into it. Let me share my screen so that you can see what I am talking about. And there we go. Nice. So we're starting with incident reports. Now, of course, this is one of the more popular types of reports, and it is one of the ones that many students sort of gravitate toward because it's fairly easy to understand and identify. Now, what is an incident report? Now, an incident report, I have a simple definition there. It is the result of deliberate actions that cause harm, injury, or damage. And that could be injury to yourself or someone else, and damage to property, whether it is maybe, you know, a broken window, damaged light bulb, broken chair, whatever the case is. Maybe somebody's clothes got ripped or, something like that. So that is pretty much what an incident report is. And for an incident report, like I said, is the one that a lot of students gravitate toward because they can easily say, okay, this person was injured. It was done deliberately by someone else. So, like, in a case of a bullying situation, that is considered an incident report. And while there may not be a physical injury, there is harm because, people may have like emotional and psychological outcomes and so on. So we students are pretty clear on this person did something to that person or this person did something that damaged property. That is usually the one that they're absolutely clear on. Now, the other one that I have identified out of the five is called the activity report. Now, some students have a little challenge recognizing what an activity report is, especially when they think about different kinds of situations. But when we go through all the five, I'll come back and explain, some of the distinguishing features if there is any kind of confusion. Now, an activity is a situation where participants interact with items or the environment, and they're like either exploring things, they're learning things, or they're creating projects. So if there's a situation where you have to create like a model of the life cycle of a butterfly or something like that. That is an activity done with class. You might do it with a group. If you go on, let's say, like a field trip, that is an activity where there's some participation. Students are walking around, they're observing things, they're being asked questions, they can ask questions, and that sort of thing. That's an activity. So the activity style report, there's a lot of interaction and participation with the environment and with objects. So, like with the model, creating a model, you're interacting with other people, like your group members, or if you're doing it on your own, you're still interacting with objects, like you might be cutting paper, coloring things, sticking things, and so on. With the field trip, you are interacting with a group, asking questions, observing the environment, and that type of thing. If you're doing another example of an activity report is like a cleanup, so your school participated in a cleanup for Earth Day, and write a report to your principal about that situation. So you're going around cleaning up the school and so on. That would be an activity report. So far we have the incident report and we have the activity report, right? Another type of report is an accident report. Now, these are unexpected actions that cause harm, injury, or damage. Now, you might notice that definition is very close to the incident report. And yes, incident and accidents are very closely related because you have similar kinds of things happening. What makes a difference between an incident and an accident is the intention of the participants. So if someone is walking and let's say the steps or the hallway happens to be wet and they slip and they fall, they injure themselves, that's an accident. If, however, they were pushed by someone else deliberately, then that would be an incident. Now, we are going to talk a little bit later on about why making these distinctions happens to be important, especially if students are struggling with understanding how to write reports. Making these distinctions can actually help them know what to include, and especially when it comes to the ending of the report, how to end the report effectively. So that's why we're really going through these types of stories early on before we even get into types of reports. Sorry, we're doing this early on before we even get into the detailed, the actual sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph writing, because it's important that students can clarify and make these kinds of distinctions so that when they approach their prompts, they can understand just by reading the prompt, they would know what kind. Now, we're not getting into that today. That's for a later episode. So, keep with the program, keep checking in, but we are going to get to all of that. We're just taking it, step by step. And for this week, what I'm recommending, so students know what a report is, they know what they have to aim for in terms of the requirements. And now we're looking at the different types so they can start organizing to really write reports effectively. So that's the accident report. Then we have another type of report, which is the competition report. And these are situations where there are winners and prizes. So usually in this kind of report, you might have like a race or some sort of, let's say, art competition, math competition, spelling bee, those types of things. These are competition kind of reports. And what that means is that participants are competing to see who would win. And when there is a winner, there are usually at least two places. So let's say, like maybe there's a football match and there are two teams playing. So there's either a winner and a second place, kind of thing. And then you would have prizes. People might be awarded prizes for like player of the match and those kinds of things. You might have a trophy for the winning team and so on. Now, with competition reports, and like I said, we're going to be going through these in a lot more detail. And certainly when I teach my classes, we go through these, we play games. There's an interactive online worksheet that I share with my students where they can, make that selection. And so I do spend like about a week or two reminding students of these different types before we get into the writing. And then I go through it over and over, especially when we look at analyzing report prompts. We go over it again because, like I said, it helps students form categorizations in their minds that gives them that confidence to approach their writing. So with the competition, let's see, there's one thing to remember with competitions. Now notice I mentioned like a spelling bee where you might have a team, a football match where you might have a team, but there are also competitions where there are individuals. So working as a team is just one person who is participating in that competition that might win. So you have a team sport versus an individual sport, or you have a team competition versus an individual competition. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about competitions. All right, so let's see. What else do we have? We have events. Now, events are related to activities, and some students have some difficulty um, making the distinction between events and activities. And at some level, they're really closely related. But what's the difference here is that for an event, we're looking at situations where there are presenters and speakers plus an audience and listeners. So with an activity, there's a lot of interaction and participation. In an event, you have more of a separation between the people who are presenting and speaking and the people who are listening or receiving the information. So, an event might be something like a concert. Even if the child is one of the presenters in the concert, they are still in a speaker audience kind of situation. Another event would be like, a program done at school during assembly. You might also have let's say, like a prominent person visiting the school to to share information with the assembly or with a class. All those types of situations are speaker audience kind of situations. And that is even if there's a question and answer segment, or the presenter gives the information in a very interactive way. As long as you have a designated speaker and a designated audience, that is what creates that whole event situation, event category for the different types of reports. So, as we've gone through so far, I just realized I should have done a slide with all five of them. But in any case, let me repeat them for you. We have incident reports, activity reports, accident reports, competition reports, and event reports. So those are the five most prominent types of reports and five most prominent categories. Now, remember at the beginning, I mentioned that there is another type of report that students may encounter that I don't really have in these slides today, but I'm going to, as we continue, I will share more information on it. Um, I categorize like natural disasters separately, because natural disasters are kind of like a combination of incident and accident, and possibly even like an activity, because you have a situation where there may be harm, there may be injury, but it's not caused by another person, it's caused by nature. And you also would have maybe cleanup after a flood, or some sort of adverse weather and that type of thing. So it's a unique situation. So it really deserves a category by itself. But from what I've observed in terms of reviewing the responses and the types of reports that generally come, and we've seen two situations where we have had reports for SEA so far. If you review those, you would see those prompts generally focus on one or more of the five that we went through here today. However, students really should go through that process of understanding that natural disaster report. So I do include it in my sessions when we review them. But if a student works with only the five, then they would still be well covered when they have the three prompts to choose from at the day of SEA should they get a report. So when it comes to report writing, I recommend focusing on these five, and you can do many things to engage students and have them really explore the different types. So you can give them topics and worksheets. And in my textbook, we do this as lesson one. It's part of lesson one, understanding what a report is and what the types are. And there are worksheets. There is a worksheet in the textbook that helps students, navigate. I think it's a list of 10 um, prompts, just, one line prompts, not the essay style, because right now we're just looking at the different types. And so they can review and check what their understanding is. And the workbook, which will be out soon, I'm so excited. I heard back from the printers today. Um, when the workbook and journal are out, there are additional worksheets where students can practice really understanding the different types of reports. Now, I focus on these five alone in the workbook and in the textbook, but certainly if you're following these lives, then you would get a lot more information about the natural disaster report, as well as if you I'm revising some my booklets which have sample reports. I also have a booklet on natural disaster reports, so you do get a lot of information on that if that's a concern for you. But like I said, the basic five, that's enough for a student to work with, and they will still get in the right amount of information that would help them have the best opportunity of making an educated selection when they get their prompts, should there be a report for SEA 2024. All right. So we have these. Now, there's one other thing that I want to touch on when it comes to the reports and report writing. There is a question of, is this an eyewitness report? Technically, all reports are eyewitness, but there is actually a distinction, at least I make a distinction between an eyewitness and what I call a participant report. And this is something that I think students really need to understand. And again, during this week, we're introducing many concepts and ideas that we will be revisiting over and over because, of course, repetition and as many what we call exposure points, touch points, level of interaction, as many opportunities as possible to reinforce. We will be doing a lot of those. But the distinction that I make between eyewitness and participant is this. An eyewitness means that something happened in front of you and you saw it, and because you were there, you're being asked to write a report on it. A participant report means that you were involved in the situation, and being involved means that you did things and you um, said things perhaps that contributed to how the incident or activity or whatever it was unfolded, which is different from just being there. So let's look at, let's say a bullying situation. An eyewitness report on a bullying situation would be, I was in the cafeteria and I saw um, one child bullying another child, and then I saw somebody run to call a teacher, and I'm just watching it like I'm watching a video kind of thing. That's eyewitness. The participant type of report is, maybe I was the one being bullied, or maybe I saw the bullying situation and I was the one who went to call the teacher, and I tried to intervene and stop the bullying and, that kind of thing. That would be a participant report. And the main difference, and why students really do need to recognize that there is a difference between an eyewitness report and a participant report, is because if you are asked to write a participant report, you absolutely must include yourself in the report. So you're not just saying that I was an observer and this is what I observed. You are saying I was there and this is what I did and this is what everybody else did. And that means that your eyewitness report can be written from a completely objective position without including yourself, but your participant report has to be written in a way that you are included, so you will have to use pronouns that include you. And I said that slowly because I know this issue of pronouns and including pronouns is a hot topic where reports are concerned. But I'll tell you this. If you don't already have a copy, make sure you get a copy of the frequently asked questions about report writing that was issued by the Ministry of Education in 2021, and read through that document. In that document, the instructions and the guidelines are, whether you include yourself or not depends on the prompt. And when we do analyzing prompts, I'll show you the difference. And how you include yourself when you use pronouns, you're not going to be penalized for using pronouns. In fact, if the prompt requires you to include yourself and you do not include yourself, then you're not effectively responding to the prompt. So it is okay to use pronouns, but everything in a report is very strategic and detailed. So there is a way and a strategy for using those as well. And the main thing that would help you determine, do I include myself or not, is whether the prompt is telling you you are participating or you are just an observer. Some prompts allow you to choose, in which case I recommend always use the observer style because that reduces the possibility of informality. But there are some prompts you cannot do that because it says you participated and you represented your school in a competition and those kinds of things. You are the main participant, so you absolutely have to include yourself. And these are things that students need to understand. So when it comes to reports and different types of reports, we have the five types that we went through briefly. And of course, if you want more practice with that, send me a message. Um, you can get a copy of my textbook. And like I said, I think in about 2 weeks, the workbook and journal will be out, so there'd be additional practice. Um, so definitely work on that with your child or your students. Make sure they understand these things. But while they're working with these five types of reports and that natural disaster style report, they also need to recognize that there is a difference between an eyewitness and a participant. In both cases, you are there. That's why you are reporting on the situation. But in one case, you're just like watching it like a movie unfolding in front of you. And in the other case, you are actually actively involved in what's going on. All right. So the thing with the reports, and I'm wrapping up the types of reports now. We have the five types: incident, activity, competition, accident, and event. And then we have the natural disaster one, which deals with things like floods and earthquakes and, storms and so on. And then we have the fact that we're dealing with an eyewitness versus a participant. And I hope that I made it clear enough to show you what is the difference between those two. All right. So that's it for types of reports. Now let's change our attention over to stories. Now with stories, I have, let's see. I don't want to say stories are complicated because I love writing stories and so on, but there's a lot more involved in understanding stories and understanding how to develop really exciting stories. I know many teachers don't go into these kinds of things, but at least in my case, I have found that when students really understand some of these things, it helps them make decisions and it helps them as they create their stories decide what to do. And for any student who is struggling with coming up with ideas, absolutely understanding this is going to help them come up with ideas. Now, in the beginning, things are going to be moving a little bit slowly. So, because we're now getting into some of these things, and it may not look like if they really care or they understand, but it really is going to help them. Now, in my class, we're doing this really fun activity, and I am looking so forward to the Thursday session. This is the narrative writing class I'm doing for those who are aiming for and heading for SEA 2024. The last session we discussed briefly some of these, the different types of stories, and we looked at something called subgenre, which covers the different categories of stories. Now, there's a difference between types of stories and subgenre because types of stories you have things like, like monster stories, superhero stories, quest and all those kinds of things. And then you have the subgenre, which the genre would be fiction, and genre just really means category of writing. So we're dealing with fiction because we're making up a story. And the subgenre with fiction means what kind of story are you making up? Now, that's what we'll be going through today. 7 different subgenre that I think all students should be aware of. And as we practice and as you work with your child or your students, you would find that some students are more proficient in one or the other. And my recommendation is as you explore all of them and the ones that you found that students are more proficient in, choose the top three and then focus on those as you practice. Because there is a way that you can pretty much twist almost any prompt into any subgenre that you choose, and that is the flexibility with narrative writing. So it's a good thing because then you can train your child or your student to recognize how to do that so that they would be able to respond to any prompt. But it's also not such a good thing if a student really doesn't understand any of this and they don't know how to come up with ideas. It's going to kind of retard and hinder them because then it's going to take some time to figure things out. But that's why we're doing this, and that's why I'm going to show you these different types. So I'm only dealing with seven. There are more than seven, and the two that I don't recommend for SEA are horror stories and romance. I'm not saying that you can't write them. I'm just saying that I don't deal with them in my classes because remember, this is an exam. And that's what I keep reminding students. Remember, those of you who were there, we looked at the first episode of this series. Remember, a narrative in this context, SEA narrative, you're writing a story in the context of academics and you're writing a story in the context of an exam. So while you may be really good at certain things, you really want to aim for what the requirements of the exam are, and that's all. So I would say be careful of romance and horror for the reason that people tend to be, I don't want to say emotional, but they tend to have really strong reactions to horror and um, the romance. Some people think that students at the SEA age should not be writing romance or horror. I've had students. I had this one student once. I laugh about it now, but every story he would ask me, "Miss, can I kill the main character?" I'm like, "Why, child? Why?" I'm like, "No, don't kill them. All right, something could break, somebody could get damaged. You know, how much blood can I put?" I'm like, "Okay, remember this is an exam, okay? Just please remember this is an exam. So whatever you do, remember you're aiming for certain things. Yes, you want the story to be exciting. If that's your preferred genre, I will help and I will, show you how to do it well. But just remember it's an exam. So if you have a student like that, don't fuss, don't worry. From time to time, I will, add in some details. The principles that we discuss in terms of rising action and everything will apply to horror and romance just as well, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on those because I don't think it's absolutely necessary. If you're in a unique situation and you need some guidance, message me. I can help with that. But if you're not, then thank your lucky stars that you don't have to read about people getting decapitated every story. Okay. So that's the horror and the romance. Now, so those are the ones that we're not going to touch. And let me just say again before we get into it, there are some that you would find there's an overlap. And so it's not that, okay, if it's one, it can't have any elements of the others. That's the other beautiful thing about stories. You can mix and create as you need to, but separating them, at least in the beginning, when you're learning about them, helps you understand the kinds of elements that you can include that would make a really good story. Now, the reason I go through this with my students, and I think I started before and I told you we're doing comparisons with the stories. And in the class that I'm having on Thursday this week, we're going to be discussing the connection with stories and music and with stories and colors because For those of you who know me, you know that I'm really into multisensory learning. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm really into multisensory learning. And what that is about is simply engaging students through multiple interactions and multiple senses at a time. So we're not just reading, like looking at words and engaging that sense of, word recognition. We're really looking at infusing activities and movement and artwork so we can get, the color and the drama and, sound and all those things. Because when you think about it, students learn best when they have multiple points of contact with the information. And we explore life and we go through life by interacting with our five senses. We touch things, we see, we hear, we smell, we taste. That's how we learn about the world around us. And I think learning about writing works best when we do that because writing is like an expression of ideas and life. And so um, we do all of these things in class. So I'm really excited about looking, finding out how the students match the types of stories with their music and the colors. We're doing some artwork and that kind of thing. And just in case you're wondering, yes, I still have room. I'm really trying to keep my classes, small, but I do have, one or two spaces available. So you can WhatsApp me 717-4993 or message me on Facebook to complete the registration if you'd like to. I'll put a link to the registration of the for that particular session on Thursday. It's at 6:30. We're going 6:30 to 8. I did it a little later to accommodate. I know when we get into it, many schools have lessons and so on. But if your child needs a little extra creative writing support, definitely, like I said, we're having fun and we're learning at the same time. So look into it. And certainly, if you don't have the time or the availability or the finances to engage, it's 850 for the term. And this particular program runs for 3 terms. So we're doing this term narratives. During the July vacation period, we will be looking at completing our discussion on narratives. And then come September, we'd be looking at the reports and narratives together. um, I am compiling all this information into textbooks, just like I have for the report writing. I'm completing one for narrative writing. So look out for that. I will keep talking about it. And then eventually, I would happy dance the day when I have the book to show you in my hand. But coming soon, when I say soon from the printers, that's probably about a month because the report writing one is going to be done in about 2 weeks. Um, Narrative is going to take a little bit longer than that. I mean, I've been working on this for a while because I've been using the strategies, working with students and seeing how well they go, what works and what didn't work so well, and then keep adjusting so that when I put the book together, it's going to have activities and information that I've used in my own classes. So, not just the theoretical stuff. Anyway, let me get to, I'm sorry, I get excited about writing and these things, and seeing my book in print is going to be really exciting. And having that information to share with you is the best thing because, like I said, I keep my classes really really small. So sometimes, I mean, I advertise up to 8 students, but between you and me and the internet, I really kind of cut off like about 4 or 5, um because that allows me to give each child that individual attention, and really get into their writing and feedback is so important, but we'll talk about that as well. Let me come back to the topic that we're supposed to be working on today, which is the different types of stories. But like I explained, I said, and the title is Types of Stories, but this is really subgenre categories of stories. And this is what students can use to help them come up with ideas. So, for example, This one is called realistic fiction. These are made up stories that seem like they can actually happen in real life. So if you're writing a story about something that happened at school and your environment and your setting is like actual school and the people are like actual people, then that's a realistic fiction. What I've found is that most students that I've encountered, except the ones that are really into the horror, those, most students that I've encountered are very comfortable with realistic fiction, and they write realistic fiction because they're writing about what they know, what they would have actually done, and that kind of thing. And that's perfectly fine. I personally think it sort of limits the imagination. And I actually had a situation where we were talking about a prompt, and I was showing the students, how they can use their imagination and really come up with interesting ideas as long as it fits the plot and whatnot. And we were talking about what was it? I think it was mutant rat that tried to take over the village or something like that. Yeah, it was a really fun story. Um, and one of the students asked me, is like, Miss, you could do that? And I'm like, yes, sweetheart, this is the beauty of narrative writing. You can make up things and create your plot and your structure and get really exciting stories. So, not to say that realistic fiction can't be exciting, it can, and there are ways to do it, and we certainly cover that in my classes. But many students, when they stick with realistic fiction, they tend to not really explore conflict as much. And that is why many stories that fit within realistic fiction are not as, exciting and interactive as they could be. There's a way to do it. I show my students how, but most of them don't begin that way. But that's just one option. And the other options to me are really worth exploring. And the very next one is like the total opposite of the realistic fiction, which is fantasy. And specifically, fantasy includes stories that have magic, talking objects, talking animals, and that type of thing. So if there's a genie, fantasy. If there's a portal carrying you to another world, fantasy. Cinderella, Snow White, all of those have some fantasy element in them. They're more in the line of, fairy tales, which we will get in a little bit, but talking animals and so on, we have that kind of fantasy element. So, like Beauty and the Beast as well. Objects move, they talk. There's magic wands, wizards and all these. We could go all those kinds of ways with the fantasy. Completely open, anything your mind can relate to, imagine, you can write. Of course, we're going to get into plot soon, so everything has to fit within the plot, but we can be as creative as possible. So then we have the folk tales and fairy tales, which I just mentioned, like Cinderella, um, the Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Red Riding Hood. Those are the fairy tales that we're familiar with. But when it comes to folk tales, I'm a fan of folk tales. I love folk tales. I think they're not explored as much in our country, but we have in Trinidad and Tobago a very rich folk tale legacy. And it surprises me that so many students don't know about these things. So we have Laja Bless, Sukunya, Lagahu, Phantom, Guppy, or Duppy. I think it's Duppy. We have Tobago Mermaids. We have the what's the other one? We have Papa Pois, we have Mama Glow. I mean that those are eight just off the top of my head. And there are others that we don't I think there's There's one about a Tobago witch as well, and there's so many. But what makes a folktale and fairy tale different from just any type of fantasy story is that there are specific characters. And you notice that I called out characters just now and not necessarily stories. Folktales and fairy tales are built around characters. And what is passed down from generation to generation is not so much the stories themselves, because yes, there are lots of stories told about these, but the stories are all about specific characters that have certain qualities and certain traits. So, for example, for those of you who know about the Sukunya, you know that this is an old witch, usually an elderly woman, who would turn into a ball of fire, and she would take her skin off and pack it away. And if you throw salt, there's a whole law around folklore, folktale, fairy tale kind of thing. There's a whole structure around who she is, what she could look like, and so on. Laja Bless as well. There's a whole story and format around who she is, what she would look like. Broad brim hat, half side absolutely beautiful, half side hideous, one cow foot. So we have these specific um, elements and qualities of the characters. So, whatever story you create, if you're dealing with a folktale character, usually you would want to stick within what is expected, because these are the things that would make the story interesting, where, you know, readers recognize these different characters, right? So, that's folktales and fairy tales. Yep, monsters, non human creatures, definitely. And well, this image is of a unicorn. Those of you who know about unicorns, you know that the horn is magic, etc., etc. So that there's stuff that you know about the characters, and then you could create any story around them, right? Then we have mystery stories. Mysteries are, the kind of, we call them who done it. So something happened and the detective is trying to figure out who did it. So we have official detectives, and then we have what we call the armchair detectives. You're exploring, trying to figure out, and you're finding clues that lead you to a conclusion. The real beauty about mystery stories is, of course, when the conclusions are wrong, and then you have to, you get the aha moment at the end. Yep, that's where mysteries are really exciting. Readers think they know, but then in the end they're surprised or they're confirmed, and that really works well with mysteries. Then we have the action and adventure. Action and adventure, going on a hike, climbing Mount Everest. There's a um, you know, animal attack, dealing with nature, being lost in a forest. These kinds of things are generally action and adventure, because you're going on a journey where there's some excitement, but there's also risk and danger. And the risk and danger is not necessarily somebody trying to do you harm. It's really just you against the elements, or the people against the elements, and we're figuring it out as we go, and all that type of thing. So yes, like I said, this is just an overview of the different types so that you can understand them. But there's so much that you can do in terms of working with your student or your child, understanding these types of stories. And as you can imagine, if a student really understands what an action and adventure story is, and they like writing those kinds of stories, then they can, when they read a prompt and they don't know what to write, they can decide, okay, you know what? I'm good at action and adventure stories. Let me write an action and adventure story. If I have to write that, because they know the elements, they can decide, well, okay, I need these three things. I need to do this. I need to do that. And then they have their whole beginning and their whole format and structure, and they don't have to spend time struggling trying to come up with ideas. So these are actually like, tips and prompts and catalysts to really help generate ideas when students are struggling with ideas. So that's action and adventure. Then we have science fiction. This is another one of my favorites. Um, you can ask anybody who knows me really well. There are two types of stories that I love watching. I love watching end of the world natural disaster kind, which usually has some science fiction in them. And then I love watching movies with aliens, any kind of alien. Better yet, if they're not biped, they have like tentacles and, limbs that don't look like ours. The crazier the better. Different worlds, you know, things function differently. Now, one of the main reasons recognizing the different types of genre and subgenre like these helps students is because when you have a category, it doesn't only affect what happens in the story, it also affects like character description and setting description. Because, of course, if you're dealing with a science fiction story, your characters can have, the aliens, if you're describing them, they don't even have to look human, they don't have to have anything. Students can use their imagination, um you know blue hair, five eyes, whatever the case is, eyes at the ends of their hands instead of on their face, whatever. Um so it opens up like a whole new range of character description. Plus, because it's a science fiction and you're looking at maybe space and technology and all of these things, it opens up a whole new range of setting description too, because we can have like spaceships, excuse me, objects in the environment, we can have portals, we can have trees that move and talk, and all kinds of things can happen in any of these different types of stories. So it really depends, but of course, if you're writing realistic fiction, you can't include any of these, and you have to stick within certain principles. So this really helps students understand that. Let's see. I think there's one more. That would be thriller and suspense. And this is, these are stories that have a lot of tension and anticipation, excitement, and it's different from mysteries. I know we have the mystery thriller, mystery suspense, thriller and suspense, and some people think of these like they're one and the same. But there's a difference between mysteries and thrillers. A mystery, something happened already, and you're trying to figure out how, and maybe bring somebody to justice or whatever the case is. But with a thriller, it hasn't happened yet, but there's this sense of impending doom. The clock is ticking, time is running out. We have to solve this before the explosion. We're not having an explosion already happen and then trying to figure out who caused it. We're looking at the explosion has not happened yet. There's a bomb planted somewhere, and we're trying to find the bomb before it explodes, and we're stopping the crime before it happens. So that's really the difference between thriller and suspense and mysteries. Now, of course, when we think of movies and, really long stories, you would see that in science fiction, you can have some thriller situations and mystery situations, and sometimes they're really mixed. And, we don't get like a one subgenre by itself unique, only that. So you can write a realistic fiction that has some suspense with it and so on. So it's often very mixed. But what I always keep going back to, remember, students need this understanding so that they can generate ideas, and it will help them and help guide them, make their stories effective and interesting and exciting. And remembering that this is an academic response. Yes, it's a story, but it's an academic situation, and students have been graded for certain elements that they must include. And so having them really deal with it separately would help them keep things focused, because we're dealing with a really micro story. We're not talking about something like Avatar that's like 3 hours long. We're talking about it might take you maybe 10 minutes to read it. Takes about an hour to write, 15 minutes, which is what students have allocated. But as a reader, it's going to take you like maybe 10 minutes to read the story, maybe 15. So it's a really short story. So students have to keep that in mind even as they draw ideas from, movies and programs that they've seen. All right. So that is it for today in terms of the types of reports and types of stories. So just to do a quick recap with the types of stories, we had realistic fiction, we had action and adventure, thriller and suspense, science fiction, folk tales and fairy tales, fantasy, and I always miss one. Um, let's see, which mystery, folk tales, fairy tales, fantasy, realistic fiction. Right. So yes, of course, go back through the video and check. I didn't create that, one slide that has all of them on it, but you should have the information. You just rewind a little bit after you get the recording so that you would have all of it. But so that's what I think, and that's what I'm doing with my students as we get started so that they can understand that with stories, there's a wide variety of things that they can use to really activate their imagination and get that excitement and so on going. And with reports, there is a structure that they can follow. And if they follow it in detail, they would know exactly what to do and how to do it. So there are guidelines and there are parameters that they can work with. So it's not about just, here's a prompt, write a story. Are you writing a science fiction? Are you including yourself? Are you not including yourself? And just as with reports, where you have that participant versus observer, you do have that in narratives as well. But that's called first person versus third person story. And we are going to come back to that, just as we're going to come back to all of these concepts, because, like I said, as many points of interaction as possible, that's what's going to help students really remember and explore. So that's the end of the session today. Thank you so much for those of you who were able to um, stay through the whole rambling. Those of you who came but got bumped out for whatever reason, couldn't stick around. The recordings are there. So I'm hoping that you're hearing this on a recording and thinking, yes, I did. I came back to it. Um, and if you missed any of the previous ones, you have three places you can find it. SEA Peaceful Approach. Well, actually four places now, I think. Yep. SEA the Peaceful Approach. If you're in that group, it's there in the media archive. Word Coach Youth, my Facebook page. It's there in the media archive in videos. In um on YouTube. The channel is Word Coach Limited. All the videos will be archived there. And of course, if you just want this series, then you can go to my website. And like I said, all the links are in the description of this video, so you can find everything there quite easily. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I look forward to continuing this series with you. Enjoy the rest of your day today, and I'll see you next week when we continue our journey to SEA 2024. Bye, everybody.